All right, so let's try to create a preset that has some of the core Steve Vai tones. This is kind of building on the Ballerina 1224 preset that I did about a week or so ago, where I focused on the clean tones, but here I want to add in some of the crunch and lead tones as well. I'll start off by saying that a good part of Steve Vai's tone comes from, well, obviously all guitarists, a good part of their tone comes from their hands and how they play, but for Steve Vai, a lot of his tone does come from his guitar, more specifically the pickups. If you've ever tried any of the, say, the Mars Evolution or any of his other pickups, um, they have a very specific kind of EQ setting. Obviously, they're pretty high output, so that definitely shapes the tone right up front. Unfortunately, I don't have any guitars with pickups like that in them, so we're doing our best here to recreate the tones. But I will say that having had those pickups in guitars before, that a lot of kind of the pick attack and the overall EQ of the sound does start with those pickups. So keep that in mind. So let's start out by talking about the setup here. I've got this rig running in hybrid mode. So we've got three scenes. We've got a clean scene, a rhythm scene, and a lead scene. We'll go through each one. And then along the bottom, we've got the stomp mode. So the compressor's hooked into that. I've got an envelope filter to kind of mimic some of the wah stuff. And I've got a pitch shift just to play with. And then we've got a chorus. So let's start with a clean scene here. So we are using a dual compressor. I've got it set pretty high. Again, we're trying to get kind of that spanky, clean tone that you might hear on the Ballerina or on Sisters and things like that. From there, the chorus we're running is the Chief, it's the E2W in stereo. The mix is pretty high, but I find this chorus is pretty subtle, so you can get away with pretty high mixes. For the amp, we're using the Mesa Johns 2C Channel 1. This is one of the new amps that came out with the 2.0 release. I find it's a really good kind of pure clean tone for this kind of thing. And then we're running a Zilla Open Gold 19 as the cabinet. And then for all the patches, we've got a dual delay running. I've got a 400 millisecond delay with a little bit of feedback, and then a longer delay with much less feedback. So again, we're just trying to get that mix of delay there, and then we've got a lush reverb on the end. So let's hear the clean tone. So we got it kind of like spanked to it. So for the crunch tone, obviously Steve Vai's had his own signature amps for quite a bit. These days he's with Synergy amps. He's been a long time with Carbon. Previous to that, I know he's used Marshalls, he's used Wagner's. There's no perfect amp model within the Quad Cortex to cover his amp. I did find a few neural captures in there where folks had captured the Carbon Legacy. I didn't find those captures worked perfectly for where I was trying to get to. So I ended up using the Freeman 100 rhythm. And I'll call out a couple things here. One, we don't have the gain super high. We're only about between 3.5. The other thing I'll call out is he keeps his amps pretty scooped. And this is where you'll find a difference between kind of Vai's tone and, say, Joe Satriani's tone. So Satriani is much more mid-forward, where Vai, although his pickups have a good amount of mid in them, for the amps, he's going to scoop it out more. So you can see here, we're pushing the bass, we're pushing the treble and the presence, but the mids are dropped back. And so, to me, the key component of kind of the Steve Vai tone is getting that big, beefy, tight bottom end that he gets. And one thing I'm using to try to do that is I've got this Freeman overdrive pedal in front of the amp. I'm not pushing any gain. I am pushing a lot of bottom end and a little bit of presence. And then I'm using the tight and the trim again, to really kind of tighten up the bottom end to keep it from getting too loose and too flabby when you go to the higher gain. And so, the rhythm kind of sounds like this. So kind of a nice chunky rhythm. It's also nice, you want to back up and have a little bit of a kind of a crunchy lead. Do that. So then for the lead tone, what I'm doing is a couple of things. One, I am doing a little bit of compression. I'm just trying to get a little smoother tone without having to turn up the gain, too much. And then we're putting a DS1 in front of the amp. And this is something that he used to do quite a bit, is to use a DS1 in front of his amp. Not so much for the distortion. You can see here the distortion is pretty low, but to kind of roll the tone back and push up the level. So it's pushing the amp harder. I also did turn the chords back on a little bit, just to thicken up the tone a little bit. And then for the high cut, we are dropping the frequency of the high cut a little bit again, just to get a little bit of a smoother top end. And so what you get there is a tone like this, and I'll start off on the neck pickup. And then if you switch to the bridge pickup, you kind of get that big kind of singing sustain that he has. And then I had a couple odds and ends in here just for fun. So he always seems to have a couple of things on his pedal board. One is obviously a wah pedal. Again, I don't have an expression pedal here, so if you have one, you can use the wah with the Cortex. I just put an envelope filter here. You can see the settings. Just if I wanted to play with kind of a wah-ish kind of thing. And then the other thing is he uses pitch shift a lot. And so I've got a pitch shift here. Right now I've just got it set up for like to add in an upper fifth. He uses a Digitech whammy pedal that allows him to change the pitch shift. So you could do something similar again. If you had an expression pedal, you could attach it to this pitch course on the pitch shifter. But I just set it to that fifth, just to have something to kind of play around with. And I think it sounds interesting if you mix the envelope filter and the pitch shifter. The other thing I noticed, just as an aside, the pitch shifter really changes character based on where you put it. You can see here I've got it between the amp and the cabinet. If you put it before the amp, it's doing something kind of strange to my ear. Here it is before the amp. It almost seems like the pitch shift is going down, but if I put it here, I don't know why it's doing that. There's something strange in how the pitch shift kind of interacts with. And as you can see, the shift is up. So I don't know why it's sounding kind of real low if we put it in front of the amp. Obviously, if you use the pitch shift to after the cabinet and or the EQ, the IR is really nothing but an EQ, right? So, and obviously the EQ is cutting it. So you get a much different tone if you put it out here as opposed to here. So keep that in mind if you're ever using a pitch shift, where you put it in a single chain can have a big impact on how it sounds. I like it right here between the amp and the cabinet. So this kind of mimics having the pitch shift in the effects loop of the amp, probably the closest you can get to that. Because the amp models within the Cortex don't have an effects loop, so there's nothing between the preamp and the power amp sections. But I added that in because I thought he uses pitch shifts a lot. It's kind of interesting to include on the patch, on the preset, and you can play around with it. This preset obviously will be available for download on my Neural account. Feel free to grab it and play around. Let me know what you think. Thanks.